AITA for refusing to change my wedding menu for my in-laws? My fiancé and I have been together for a good few years now, just long enough to really know each other and feel confident that we're ready to do this whole marriage thing. We've been through a lot, grown together, and when he proposed, it was like everything clicked into place. Planning this wedding has felt like planning the first official celebration of the life we want to build together. I know, sounds a little cheesy, right? But it's true. We're really excited to do this our way. To have this one special day be about us, our friends, and our families coming together to celebrate who we are as a couple. From the very start, we wanted a wedding that reflected our personalities. Nothing massive, nothing overly formal, just a small, intimate gathering with our favorite people. We decided on about 60 guests, which feels like the perfect size for a cozy ceremony and a fun, lively reception without losing the personal touch. We put a lot of thought into each detail, wanting it to feel special yet relaxed. Something where people could just enjoy themselves and celebrate with us. Now, the menu. Oh, the menu. Both of us are huge food lovers. We're the type who plan date nights around trying new restaurants. And when we travel, half the excitement is exploring the local cuisine. We wanted the food at our wedding to be something memorable, something we'd look forward to eating, and that felt true to us. So, we put a ton of effort into designing this menu with our caterer, a mix of seafood, pasta, and a few vegetarian options. It's not your standard wedding food, but it's the kind of stuff we absolutely love, and we wanted our guests to enjoy a taste of our favorite things too. Plus, each dish has a little personal story behind it, like the pasta dish inspired by one of our first dates and the seafood as a nod to all the beach trips we've taken together. After months of planning, tweaking, and taste testing, we finally locked in the menu, and we're thrilled. Every bite is something we'd eat on any special occasion, and we can't wait to share it with everyone. But, of course, in the middle of all this excitement, there's always a curveball. Enter my future in-laws. They're wonderful people, truly. They've always been welcoming and warm toward me, and I know they're excited about the wedding too. But here's the thing, they're very traditional eaters. They come from the school of thought that a proper meal has a big slab of meat, preferably steak, and a hefty side of potatoes. If they're going out for a nice meal, it's a steakhouse. If they're grilling on the weekend, it's burgers and ribs. So you can imagine their reaction when they heard our wedding menu didn't include any of that. I get it, truly, they're used to one kind of meal, and there's nothing wrong with that. But this wedding menu is something I was really looking forward to. It's a piece of our story, something my fiancé and I put a lot of ourselves into, and changing it felt like giving up a little part of that vision. Of course, I figured they'd be polite and maybe just have fun trying something new for one night. But, as it turns out, they had other ideas. So, the first time my future mother-in-law brought it up, I honestly didn't think much of it. She casually mentioned how interesting the menu sounded and asked if we'd thought about adding a steak option. I just smiled, nodded along, and said something like, "We thought about a lot of options, but we finally decided on this." I figured she was just making conversation, trying to picture what the food might be like since it wasn't the classic lineup she's used to. I didn't read too much into it. Maybe I was being optimistic, but I thought she'd just go with the flow. Then, a week later, she brought it up again. This time, she seemed a bit more direct, asking if we could consider a simpler option for folks who aren't as into seafood or pasta. She kind of hinted that some people might not enjoy the food as much if there isn't something classic on the menu. I could tell she was talking about herself and my future father-in-law, but she was trying to be subtle about it. Now, don't get me wrong, I respect where she's coming from, but this was one of those things where I started to feel like a line was being drawn. I tried explaining, gently, that the menu wasn't just a random list of foods we liked, it was carefully crafted. Something we'd put a lot of thought into because each dish had some personal meaning to us. I told her that our caterer had designed the courses specifically to complement each other and to fit within the whole vibe of the wedding. We'd chosen items we love and want to share with everyone, and besides, with so many different options, I figured there'd be something for everyone to enjoy, even if it wasn't exactly what they were used to. I thought that would settle it. But, of course, that didn't go over as smoothly as I'd hoped. She gave me this look, like she was both puzzled and disappointed, and then said, "Well, I just thought a wedding should have a little something for everyone." Ouch. She didn't say it outright, but I could tell she thought I was being selfish for not including something more standard. That comment sat with me for a while, and it didn't take long for her to start dropping more hints, texting my fiancé with suggestions, mentioning to me how easy it would be to just add a steak or a chicken breast for the folks who don't like fancy food. She even hinted that they'd cover the cost for any extra options if that was the issue. Now, I'll admit, my first instinct was to just grit my teeth and let it go. But the more she pushed, the more it started to wear on me. Here we were, trying to create this meaningful day, planning every detail with so much intention, and it felt like she was dismissing all of that because it wasn't meat and potatoes enough. It stung a little, I won't lie. I wanted her to be excited about our choices, to maybe see this as a way to get to know us better through the food we loved. But every time she pushed for that steak, it felt like she wasn't respecting our vision, like she didn't even want to give our ideas a chance. I could tell my fiancé was stuck in the middle, trying to keep the peace, He was supportive of my choice, but he's also the type who hates any kind of family tension. He started hinting that maybe, just maybe, we could consider adding one simple option to make them happy. I know he just wants everyone to be comfortable and enjoy the day without any friction. But I felt like I was being asked to compromise on something that mattered to me. And I couldn't shake the feeling that if I gave in on this, it would be the beginning of letting go of the things that make this wedding ours. After that conversation with my fiancé, I started second-guessing myself. I thought we were both on the same page about keeping the menu as is. But now he seemed genuinely torn. He wasn't flat out saying I should change it, but his suggestion of a compromise made it clear he was hoping I'd consider it, maybe just to avoid the ongoing back and forth with his mom. He even floated the idea that we could just tell the caterer to prepare a few plain plates. Like maybe a grilled chicken breast with some veggies, just for his parents. At first, I resisted. I mean, we'd been planning this wedding for nearly a year, and the menu was such a big part of it. We'd gone to tasting after tasting, worked with the caterer on every detail to make sure the courses reflected us. Adding an option just to make a couple of people feel more comfortable felt like it would cheapen everything we'd done. It wasn't that I wanted anyone to be unhappy with the meal. I just didn't want to lose what made this menu special. Every dish had a reason, a place in the flow of the meal. We had some amazing seafood, dishes with unique flavors and fresh ingredients, and our caterer had reassured us multiple times that there was plenty for everyone, even if they were a bit hesitant at first. So I told him that, as much as I understood his mom's perspective, I really didn't feel it was necessary to alter our plans. I explained that this wasn't just about the food, it was about creating a memorable experience for us and our guests. This wasn't some corporate event where you throw in a safe option for picky eaters. This was our wedding, and the menu represented us, our tastes, and the things we love. And if someone wasn't open to trying something new, there'd be other options for them to enjoy. My fiancé listened, but I could see that conflicted look in his eyes again. He sighed and finally said, I get it, but maybe it's not such a big deal to have just one option for them. That hit me hard. In his mind, this was something minor, something to smooth things over and avoid any lingering resentment with his family. But to me, it felt like a bigger issue than just food. It felt like a matter of standing by what we'd envisioned and respecting our own preferences. I'd been the one poring over Pinterest boards, reading about food pairings, and hunting for unique ideas that spoke to us as a couple. Changing any part of that felt like it was undermining all that effort and heart I'd put in. Still, I didn't want this to become a me versus them situation. I didn't want my future in-laws to see me as stubborn or ungrateful, especially when they'd been supportive in so many other ways. So, I told my fiancé that if it meant that much to him, I'd consider talking to the caterer about a single plain option, something that wouldn't derail the menu but could maybe ease the tension. But I'd only agree if it was a last resort and didn't affect the flow of the meal we'd planned. That way, everyone would feel a bit more comfortable, but I wouldn't feel like I was giving up what mattered to me most. He seemed relieved by that and thanked me for even being open to the idea. But in my heart, I still had that nagging feeling. I wanted everyone to love this day, but I also didn't want to feel like I'd started my marriage by caving on something that represented so much to me. And deep down, I couldn't help but wonder, was I being too rigid? Or was I just standing up for what felt like a piece of who I am? A few days after that conversation with my fiancé, I decided to bite the bullet and talk to the caterer about our options. I still wasn't thrilled with the idea, but maybe if we could offer a simple addition without too much hassle or cost, it would settle things once and for all. I called up the caterer and explained the situation, careful to make it sound as diplomatic as possible. Like it was just a tiny adjustment for a couple of people. The caterer listened patiently, and then she explained that while adding a simple option might seem minor, it wasn't that straightforward. Each dish on the menu required specific prep, timing, and setup. Even if it was just one extra dish, it would throw off the flow they'd carefully planned. She gently reminded me that any change now, so close to the wedding, could impact both timing and presentation. She said, "It's your day, this menu was created for you, and every detail was chosen with that in mind. Adding another option is possible, but it's not something I'd recommend if you want to keep the spirit of what we originally designed." Hearing her say that felt like validation. I wasn't crazy for wanting to stick with the plan. This wasn't about being difficult or stubborn, it was about the experience we'd put so much effort into creating. After all, when we started working with this caterer, we'd chosen her because of her creativity and commitment to creating unique meals. She had spent hours getting to know us, asking about our favorite foods, even listening to stories about our first dates and family traditions to design a menu that reflected us. To me, that felt irreplaceable. After the call, I sat there for a while, trying to figure out my next move. I could already see the frustration in my in-laws' faces if we held our ground. But I also felt, maybe for the first time, fully justified in sticking with our menu. This day was meant to be an expression of us. Was it selfish to want our wedding to actually feel like our wedding? Later that night, I told my fiancé about the conversation with the caterer, hoping he'd understand the complexity of the situation a little better. He nodded, but then he said, "I get it, but we might still need to figure something out, even if it's just for my parents' peace of mind." I understood where he was coming from, but I was also exasperated. We'd already done so much to accommodate everyone's needs, choosing a neutral venue, keeping the guest list small, planning the schedule to work for both sides of the family. Wasn't this one thing we could keep purely ours? As the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was backed into a corner. On one hand, I wanted to support my fiancé and his family and show that I cared about their comfort. But on the other, it felt like my vision, my hopes for this day, were being gradually chipped away. We'd created something beautiful, something personal, and I didn't want to give that up, not even in small increments. The next day, after some restless sleep and a lot of mental back and forth, I finally realized that I needed to set boundaries, not just for the wedding but for my own peace of mind. I wanted to honor my fiancé's family, but I couldn't keep stretching myself until I'd erased what we'd originally planned. So, I took a deep breath, sat down with my fiancé, and explained how this menu represented us. I told him I understood why his family wanted a more familiar meal, but that changing it at this point would feel like compromising on something incredibly important to me. I reminded him that we'd built the menu to reflect our tastes, our love of food, and all the things we'd discovered together. This wasn't just about the dishes, it was about creating a memorable experience that captured us. Changing it would feel like losing a piece of that. He listened quietly, and I could tell he understood where I was coming from, even if he was struggling with disappointing his parents. He offered a compromise, saying, maybe we could have a casual dinner for them the night before or the day after the wedding. Something with the kind of food they're hoping for, like a small cookout or a classic steak dinner. I could see he wanted to honor their wishes without disrupting our wedding. And that idea actually felt fair. It was a way to show respect without giving up something central to us. We both agreed to go with the original wedding menu, but he would propose the separate dinner idea to his parents. It wasn't a perfect solution, and I knew they still might be disappointed, but it felt like a fair middle ground. I also made it clear that we needed their support and understanding, not pressure. On our big day, we'd worked hard to balance both of our families' needs, and I wanted to draw the line at our wedding menu. A few days later, he approached his parents with the idea. He explained the reasoning behind our decision, emphasizing how much this menu meant to us and offering the additional dinner as a way to celebrate with them. I wasn't there for the conversation, but he said they took it better than he expected. His mom still thought it was a bit modern of us to skip a classic meal, but they seemed to understand that this day was ultimately about us. Setting that boundary was liberating, and it taught me a lot about standing up for what matters. I knew that blending two families into one would mean making compromises, but I was glad this didn't have to be one of them. The experience made me more confident that we could move forward as a team, honoring both sides but holding firm to what we wanted to create together. It felt good to know that, at least on this, we'd kept a little piece of our wedding exactly the way we dreamed it. With that decision made, I thought things would settle down, but I underestimated just how much tension it would still create. My fiancé's mom wasn't thrilled, and she didn't hesitate to let us know. She'd slip in comments like, well, I guess it's your day, and hopefully the food is interesting enough for everyone. I tried to brush them off, reminding myself that her opinion wasn't my responsibility, but it stung a bit. This wedding was already loaded with expectations from both sides, and sometimes it felt like balancing everyone's feelings was a second full-time job. One evening, after a family dinner where yet another comment had been made about all the fancy food, I found myself venting to my fiancé on the drive home. I told him how it felt like everything we wanted for our day kept getting questioned or second-guessed. And as much as I tried to stay calm, it was exhausting. I said it felt like his family wasn't even trying to see things from our perspective. I knew that weddings stirred up all kinds of emotions, but this was starting to feel a little unfair. To his credit, he listened patiently, and I could see he was frustrated too, not with me, but with the whole situation. He reassured me that he was with me on this, that he knew how much this menu and everything else meant to me, and that he'd stand by me no matter what. He admitted that it was hard to feel like he was letting his family down but said he also knew he needed to support our vision. Hearing him say that took so much weight off my shoulders. I realized I'd been worried he was secretly resenting me for the decision, but his words reassured me that we were truly in this together. From that moment, I could feel us getting stronger as a couple. It wasn't just about the menu anymore. It was about learning how to protect each other's dreams and make room for each other's priorities. Even when it got complicated, I knew that as long as he and I had each other's backs, we could get through any wedding stress. It wasn't about choosing one family over the other. It was about figuring out what we wanted our own family to look like. As we got closer to the wedding, I leaned more on my friends and family who were excited for us and supportive of our choices. My mom and my best friend kept reminding me that it was okay to prioritize our vision for the day, and their encouragement helped me keep a positive outlook. I even found myself laughing about it, saying things like, who knew food could cause this much drama? It became a way to shake off the pressure and remind myself that at the end of it all, the most important thing was that my fiancé and I were going to be married. Looking back, I saw this as a turning point, not just for our wedding but for our relationship. It was a lesson in sticking together when things got tough and realizing that our choices didn't have to please everyone to be valid. This was our first big test in setting boundaries as a couple. And while it was challenging, I knew we'd passed it. We were a team, and no amount of helpful family suggestions was going to change that. When the wedding day finally arrived, I was bracing myself for any last-minute drama about the food, the decorations, or who knows what else. I was a bundle of nerves, feeling the weight of every little detail we'd carefully chosen. But the moment I put on my dress and looked in the mirror, all that noise faded into the background. I took a deep breath and reminded myself, this day wasn't about menus or opinions. It was about us, about starting our life together, and making promises that truly mattered. As I walked down the aisle, seeing my fiancé's face light up reminded me that we'd made it. We'd survived the planning, the arguments, and all the compromises. I could see the relief in his eyes, too, knowing we were finally here, just the two of us in that moment, ready to take on the world as a team. When it was time for the reception, I had a moment of tension, wondering how his family would react to the food we'd so carefully planned. But as the servers brought out the first course, I looked around and saw people laughing, toasting, and enjoying themselves. The worried voice in my head quieted down when I saw his mom and dad trying the food and, dare I say, even enjoying it. They were talking with other guests, laughing, clinking glasses, and seemed genuinely engaged. All my fears about their reactions melted away, and I could finally relax. One of my favorite moments of the evening was when my fiancé pulled me aside during a quiet moment. We found a little corner to ourselves, away from the guests, and he looked at me and said, we did it our way. He was right. We had stayed true to ourselves. Despite all the pressure and expectations, we'd chosen a wedding that reflected who we were, not just what everyone else wanted us to be. It felt empowering, like we'd taken that first big step as a couple and stood our ground together. As the night went on, I started to see things differently. The food, the decor, even the minor tensions with family, it all faded into the background, replaced by joy, laughter, and celebration. I looked out at the dance floor, where everyone, from my best friend to his cousin and even his parents, was dancing, having a blast. I could see that the happiness of the day outweighed any small disagreements about the menu. Everyone there was celebrating with us, embracing this new chapter, just like we were, and that's all that mattered. After the guests had gone, and it was just the two of us, exhausted and happy, I knew we'd set a strong foundation for our marriage. This wedding was more than a beautiful day, it was a lesson. A reminder that sometimes, standing up for what you want, even when it's hard, is worth it. We'd learned to set boundaries, to prioritize each other, and to lean on each other when things got tough. That night, as we sat together, looking out over the quiet venue, I knew I wouldn't have changed a thing. The opinions, the tension, even the doubts, they were all worth it. We'd created a day that was fully ours, one that would set the tone for our marriage. It felt like we'd taken our first step forward together, facing down challenges and coming out stronger. And as we looked back on our wedding day, I knew we'd always remember it as a day when we didn't just celebrate our love but stood together as partners. For the very first time, in the days that followed the wedding, I kept replaying everything in my mind. The laughter, the shared glances, the warmth from our friends and family, and even the tiny moments I'd worried about so much, all made me realize something. I had spent months stressing over every single detail, second-guessing my choices, and trying to balance what everyone else wanted with what we felt was right for us. Yet, in the end, none of those small things mattered. What stuck with me wasn't the food we served or who sat where, it was the overwhelming feeling of love and support, filling the room and wrapping around us like a warm blanket. As much as I'd agonized over the menu and fretted about pleasing everyone, looking back, I felt proud that we'd stood our ground and honored what we believed in. Even prouder that we'd done it as a team, navigating those awkward family conversations and navigating through the disappointments gracefully. It felt like we'd passed a test of sorts, a lesson in being ourselves. Together, no matter the pressure. What surprised me the most was that my in-laws, who I'd expected to hold a grudge over the food choices, seemed to move past it. My mother-in-law even called to thank me for including her in the planning and apologized for putting pressure on us. I don't think I expected that level of acceptance and understanding, but it was a reminder that people can surprise you when you give them a chance. Maybe they had to see our choices through our eyes, or maybe they just needed to feel included in some way. Whatever it was, I felt like it opened up a new chapter of understanding and respect between us. As I unpacked boxes and started to settle into our life as newlyweds, I felt a deep sense of peace. For so long, I'd worried that sticking to our vision would mean alienating people or causing division. But it turned out to be the opposite. By staying true to ourselves, we'd built a stronger foundation not only for our marriage but for our relationships with everyone around us. Our friends respected that we had been bold enough to make this day ours. And our family, even if it took some time, saw that the choices we made came from love, not defiance. It's funny, in a way, I'd spent so much energy on trying to make everyone happy. But it was only when I stopped worrying about that and focused on creating a day that felt authentic that everyone seemed to find their place in it. I think people could sense our joy, our connection, and our commitment, and that was enough. That's what they were there for, and that's what they would remember. So, as we began this new chapter, I knew we had a lot to look forward to. Life would bring new challenges, new moments of compromise, and new times we'd have to stand firm. But now, I was confident we could handle it. We'd already shown each other that we could balance our dreams with the needs of others, without losing ourselves in the process. And if we could do that on our wedding day, with all its expectations and pressures, Then I felt sure we could do it in the years to come. In the end, I realized that a wedding isn't just about the food, or the music, or the opinions of others. It's about creating a space, a moment, a memory that reflects the life you want to build together. And in the grand scheme of things, nothing else truly matters as long as you're standing side by side, taking on the world together, one choice at a time.
WIBTA if I don't give my mom my college fund money? This whole mess starts way back when I was just a kid. My parents set up a college fund for me, and it was always this thing I knew about. Like, I grew up hearing, "Don't worry about college, we've got it covered." My dad would say that. And honestly, it took a huge weight off my shoulders. Even as a little kid, I knew I didn't come from some super wealthy family. But I believed that when the time came, I'd have this cushion waiting for me so I could focus on school without constantly worrying about money. And it wasn't just my dad who'd reassure me about the fund, it was my mom and my grandparents, too. They all told me the same story. And it was drilled into my head. This money was for me. Now, the college fund itself was held in a bank in another country. A little unusual, maybe, but I didn't think much of it. I trusted my parents. My dad was the kind of guy who made sure things were in place for the future. Especially with something as important as education. He passed away a few years ago, and losing him was like having the floor ripped out from under me. But I always held onto that fund as this thing he left behind, a way he'd set me up for success even if he wasn't there to see it. It was his last promise to me, in a way. So, this fund became something I thought about often. I'd imagine college and how the money would help me build a future I'd be proud of. I knew I could work hard and live up to my dad's plans for me. It wasn't like I thought I'd just coast through on this money. I always figured I'd work hard, study hard, and make the most of what he'd left for me. That college fund was like this anchor that kept me grounded, a reminder of my dad and of all the possibilities he wanted for me. Fast forward to when I actually started college, and the reality set in. College is expensive, like really expensive. I was looking at almost $20 a year just for tuition. Not to mention living expenses, books, all the little things that pile up. And here's the kicker, the fund? I couldn't access it, since it was in a foreign bank. It required me to be physically there to withdraw it. I found out about this right as college was starting. And honestly, it was like getting sucker punched. My dad had passed by this time. And suddenly, the one thing I had counted on for years felt completely out of reach. So, there I was, alone in this situation where I had to figure things out on my own. I didn't have the time or resources to travel to get the money. Especially not during school. Instead, I started working part-time jobs, picking up as many hours as I could. Balancing work and school was a nightmare. I was pulling shifts wherever I could, scrambling to cover my tuition and expenses. COVID hit around that time, and that just made everything 10 times harder. I was stuck in my room all day, attending classes on Zoom, doing homework, and trying to stay afloat. It felt like I was living two separate lives. One where I was supposed to be a normal college student, going to classes, studying, and trying to do well. The other where I was grinding just to make ends meet. I'd hear my friends talking about their classes or social plans, and I'd be on my way to another shift, knowing that every dollar I earned was just getting me a little closer to covering the next semester's tuition. Those years of college, they were a grind, plain and simple. There was no breezing through classes or kicking back with friends over the weekends for me. Every day was a balancing act between coursework and work shifts, and it wasn't glamorous or some inspiring, rags to riches, journey. Most days, it felt like survival. I'd start my mornings logging into virtual classes, often with bleary eyes from a late night of work, and then spend hours glued to my laptop, trying to absorb lectures, finish assignments, and somehow stay caught up. The part that really weighed on me was knowing I technically had a college fund just sitting there, untouched and inaccessible. I'd think I wouldn't even have to work so hard if I could just get that money. It was frustrating, feeling like I was running on a treadmill that didn't need to be there. The idea of the fund had been dangled in front of me my whole life as this assurance that my education was covered. But suddenly, I was on my own, carrying the financial weight of it all. When COVID hit, things went from hard to nearly unbearable. Everything was remote, and that isolation was tough. My room became my whole world, the place where I studied, ate, worked, and, when I could squeeze it in, slept. I barely left the house. And the few days I didn't have classes were filled with back-to-back shifts at my part-time job. Friends drifted away, or maybe I drifted from them. I was too busy to even think about it. But somehow, I kept going. Each month, I'd scrape together enough to cover my expenses, always counting down the days until I could finally finish school and, hopefully, move on from this relentless cycle of work and study. It was tough, but I held on to that sliver of hope, the fund. The idea that once I graduated, I'd finally be able to get my hands on it, and maybe, just maybe, I'd have a bit of breathing room. Graduating was a surreal relief. After all those long nights and endless hours of studying and working, I'd made it, and yet, I came out the other side with nothing but my degree, an exhausted body, and the relief that it was all finally over. I was just another person trying to make a living, scraping by with entry-level paychecks. But this time, I wasn't doing it for tuition or fees, I was doing it to survive. Then, out of nowhere, a glimmer of hope, I found out that the bank where my college fund was held had updated its policies. They'd introduced a process to access accounts remotely with power of attorney. Meaning I could finally claim the money without needing to go there in person. When I read about it, I felt a rush of disbelief. It was like I'd been staring at a locked door for years. Resigned to never getting through, only to suddenly discover a key in my hand. This money could change everything for me. After spending years pinching pennies, living paycheck to paycheck, the fund felt like a long-awaited lifeline. It was never going to make me rich, but it could certainly help me find a better footing as I entered the real world. I imagined what I could do with it, maybe finally afford a place on my own. Pay off the student loans I had to take out in those years. Or even save up for a rainy day. Excitement mixed with relief as I started the process to access the account. I didn't tell anyone immediately. Part of me wanted to enjoy the quiet thrill of it all. To let this good news sink in before sharing it. Just as I was beginning to move forward with my plans, the silence around my newfound relief was broken. My mom called one evening, casually at first, asking how work was going, how I was adjusting to post-college life. There was a certain tone in her voice, one that made me uneasy, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Then she mentioned it, my college fund. Her voice shifted as she asked if I'd accessed it yet. Caught off guard, I told her that I was in the process. There was a long pause on her end before she asked, in this soft, almost practiced voice, if I'd transfer the money to her once it came through. I almost laughed, thinking it was a joke, but she was dead serious. I could hear her words crystal clear as she said, "It's my money. You're done with school now. And I need it." The casual tone was gone, replaced with something so matter-of-fact, like she had no doubt this was a reasonable thing to ask. I was stunned, unsure of how to respond. This fund, promised to me by my dad, reinforced by my grandparents, was supposed to be my ticket through college, and when I couldn't access it then, it had become my safety net for after. I tried to reason with her, but every point I made seemed to bounce off her as though she'd already made up her mind. She insisted, saying I'd gotten by without it in school and that I was doing fine. The idea that I was doing fine was laughable, and I tried explaining to her just how stretched thin I was. How I'd had to scramble to make ends meet without the help of that fund. But she brushed it off, saying things like, "It was good for you to learn the value of money." As if the fund hadn't been specifically set aside for me. I felt something harden in me. I'd survived without the money when I wasn't supposed to. I'd worked my way through school with no safety net when I wasn't supposed to. And now, when I finally had a chance to use it for its intended purpose, she was treating it like some spare change she could reclaim for herself. She went on to talk about how it would be put to good use in her hands. How it was only fair since she'd saved it, and even brought up that she could have used it for family needs back then but didn't. Part of me couldn't believe what I was hearing, and yet I knew there was no convincing her. She'd made it her money in her mind, and anything I said was just seen as me being ungrateful. After that call, I felt a deep frustration that was different from any anger I'd ever felt. It was mixed with disbelief and disappointment. I wasn't even sure what to do next. But I knew one thing, this money was mine, and I wasn't going to give it up just because she'd suddenly changed the rules. After that call with my mom, I was restless, pacing around my small apartment, replaying her words over and over in my head. It was like she had this selective memory, this uncanny ability to rewrite our history in a way that suited her. To her, the money had become hers because she'd held onto it, untouched, while I struggled to pay my tuition and cover my living expenses. She conveniently forgot about all the nights I stayed up, sacrificing my social life and mental health, so I could pass my classes while juggling jobs that barely paid enough for rent and food. The money was my future, and I had already sacrificed too much to just hand it over. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. My dad had always told me that this fund was for my education and, if anything was left, it was for my start in life. He'd told me he wanted me to have the freedom he hadn't. To be able to take risks and build something without having to carry the burden of student loans or financial debt. This money was a lifeline, something he'd promised would be waiting for me. And now she was treating it like a loan she'd granted me. Something she could take back because, in her mind, I no longer needed it. My friends were as outraged as I was when I finally vented to them. They couldn't believe the audacity, especially considering I'd done everything on my own while my mom held onto that fund. One friend, Carla, pointed out how much I'd endured, saying I deserved to use it for myself without guilt. My best friend Matt even joked about how I should charge my mom for interest. Given the years of waiting I'd done, it felt like I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. If I gave her the money, I'd be setting myself back after years of struggle. If I kept it, I'd be risking her disapproval and, knowing her, a possible blow-up that might push our relationship to a breaking point. But maybe it was already broken. The more I considered it, the more I realized I needed to stand up for myself, even if it meant facing her anger. I felt this growing determination to put myself first for once. I'd spent so much time worrying about her expectations, her approval, and her opinions, but I had worked for every cent. For every opportunity. For every inch of progress I'd made on my own. And I wasn't about to give up my future because she suddenly decided that my life wasn't worth investing in. So, I made up my mind. I'd tell her no and brace myself for whatever storm might come. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. This was my chance to finally secure the future I'd been working toward all along. When I finally called her, my heart was pounding so loud I could practically feel it in my throat. I had rehearsed what I was going to say 100 times. Running through all the possible ways this could go, but nothing quite prepared me for her response. Mom, I started, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to talk to you about the college fund. There was a pause, and then she let out this exasperated sigh, like I was bothering her. What about it? I took a deep breath, bracing myself. I thought a lot about it, and I've decided that I'm going to keep the money. Dad wanted me to have it for my future, and I think I've earned the right to use it to build something for myself. Another pause. I could almost hear her eyebrows shooting up in disbelief. You're serious? I can't believe you're actually going to keep it after everything I've done for you. I swallowed, feeling the familiar wave of guilt starting to creep in, but I held firm. I know you've done a lot for me, Mom, but I also paid my own way through school. This fund was meant to help me, and it's all I have to finally be able to move forward without living paycheck to paycheck. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. So, that's it? After everything, you're just going to take the money and run? You're choosing money over family? That hit me hard, even though I'd been expecting it. I took another deep breath, reminding myself of everything I'd sacrificed to get to this point. It's not about choosing money over family. It's about choosing my future. And honestly, this isn't about you. It's about honoring what Dad wanted for me. She scoffed. Your father wanted what was best for you. And I know what's best. You're just being selfish. I could feel the frustration boiling up inside me, and I struggled to keep my voice calm. Mom, I'm sorry you feel that way, but I'm not changing my mind. I need this. I've been through so much to get here, and I'm not just handing over the one thing that can give me a stable start. For a moment, there was silence, and then she said, with this cold, clipped tone, fine, do what you want, just don't come crawling back to me when things go wrong. The words stung, but I'd expected something like this. I took a steadying breath. I'm not planning on coming back. I just need you to understand that I'm doing this for me. This isn't about rejecting you or disrespecting you. It's about finally standing up for myself. She didn't say goodbye. She just hung up. I sat there with the silence ringing in my ears, feeling the mixture of relief and hurt wash over me. It was painful, but also freeing. I'd done it. I'd stood up to her. And I was still here. Still intact. And while I knew it wouldn't be easy, I also knew that I'd finally taken control of my own life. It was terrifying, but it felt right. For the first time, I was putting myself first, without apologizing for it. And for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was truly free. In the days that followed, I was hit with every emotion under the sun. Relief, pride, guilt, sadness. It was like they all took turns showing up uninvited. Sometimes all at once. The thing was, every time I felt a pang of regret or a sliver of doubt, I reminded myself why I'd done this. I'd spent so long feeling like my life was slipping through my fingers. Like everything I worked for would somehow always be out of reach. Tied up in someone else's plans or expectations. Now, for the first time, I was holding on to something that was really, truly mine. And sure, maybe my mom would keep her distance for a while, or maybe longer than that, but I couldn't keep living my life waiting for her approval or trying to fit into the role she wanted for me. That role never felt like mine to begin with. Now, I was finally stepping into a role that felt right, one where I could actually make choices for my future. For the life I'd worked so hard to create. Once the money cleared into my account, I felt the weight lift. I had a cushion, a way to start something new without scrambling every month to make ends meet. I wasn't sure exactly what I'd do yet. Maybe I'd finally move into my own place. A tiny apartment to call my own. Or maybe I'd put it towards something bigger, an investment in myself. A chance to chase a dream I'd shelved for years. I confided in my best friend, who'd been with me through all of it. And for the first time, I saw how proud she was of me. You're finally doing what you need to do, she'd said, grinning from ear to ear. It's about time you chose yourself. And that stuck with me. Choosing myself. It sounded so simple, but it was probably the hardest thing I'd ever done. I had been taught for so long that choosing myself was wrong. Selfish, ungrateful. But standing up to my mom and holding onto my future? It didn't feel selfish at all. It felt necessary. Of course, I still worry about the family dinners, the awkward conversations, the cold looks I'd get if my mom decided to tell everyone her side of things. But for once, I'm okay with that. I'm finally at peace with the fact that I might not be the person everyone else wanted me to be. I'm finally okay with just being me. And the freedom that came with that choice? It was worth every tough conversation, every hurt feeling, and every moment of doubt. I'm ready to start my life on my own terms. With nothing holding me back. No guilt, no regrets, just a clean slate, a sense of possibility, and the knowledge that I can finally, fully, choose myself. That's worth more than any approval, any apology, any money in the world.